Good morning. Today I am delighted to be joined here by Gareth Morgan. We have kindly decided to do this in English for maximum reach, but we were tempted to run it in Welsh. So maybe, if we dip in and out.
A bit macaronic, I think. Yes.
Yes. So Gareth, I got very interested to see you've got your sort of backdrop with a ferret. Tell me about yourself.
The Ferrets, the company name, and has been for over 40 years. We started off as a project I ran for Citizens Advice Bureaus in Cardiff in the very early 1980s, which developed the first benefit calculator in the world, as far as we know, to try and help people working in the CABs there to just work out how much benefit people were entitled to. And it went very well. It won the British Computer Society Award, and it got taken up as a national project by the National Association of CABs, who got some government funding for it. And as is the third sector practice, of course, when the funding ran out, we all got fired. So we kind of sat around and think, well, that was a nice 5 years. And then somebody rang up and said, we seem to have this contract with people to keep this program thing going. How do we do that? And a bit of negotiation, and we kind of spun off, I suppose, into private sector. We took that program and agreed to maintain it, and we've kind of gone on from there. So we do lots of different sorts of benefit calculators covering not just benefits, actually. We do things like if you want a legal aid calculator, we can give you one of those, or you want to know about disabled facilities grants, or you want to know about social care charging, all those sorts of things. And we increasingly do a whole pile of other sorts of things, ranging from quick advert, expert witness work and benefits to doing a lot of training. We're running a big project for Welsh Government and have done for the past few years on training frontline workers in awareness about financial help. And the idea there is not to turn them into advisors, but to give them a bit more awareness of what help there is and where to find the specialists if they need them, and then share that with the people they meet every day. And that means, by frontline workers, we mean anybody from hairdressers to police community support officers to social workers to housing people, anybody at all that meets anybody and talks to them. So we run piles of online half-day training courses to raise their awareness. So keeps us busy.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, you've covered. I mean, you mentioned some sort of, some fairly mythical things there, haven't you? Your legal aid, uh, understanding how care's
Largely a
charged.
myth, I agree, but
I say I've been chatting this morning with a few people about legal aid and going, the cracking concept, really devastating for so many people. That is so not available these days. And I think anything that raises awareness that there is legal aid for some things has to be useful. But and also I'm interested in the charging for care, because of course we've got different for Wales, England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and a complete mystery how care's paid for in the public domain. So how are you sort of getting the message out?
that's kind of really interesting, and particularly the fact that it's a mystery, I think, to policy people, not just in terms of, well, how the hell do you pay for it, which of course is the big thing, kind of post Dilnut, but the fact that the proposals that do come out haven't gone through a kind of a rigorous kind of practical assessment. So that last batch of proposals that everyone thought was wonderful, £100,000 limit, you're never going to lose your home and so forth, sounds great as a headline. But when you look at the details of how the calculation would have been carried out, you suddenly think of, well, hang on, we've got this bizarre kind of concept about notional income from, capital that you hold. So, 24,000 England, now whatever it is. If you went up to £100,000, the actual practical effect is that if you had your £100,000, what you do is you suddenly generate a much, much higher amount of notional income to feed into the calculation. And that had the effect, we did a whole pile of modeling on it, the effect really of wiping out most of those kind of notional gains that it proposed to include. But nobody looked at that. Nobody had actually gone that far down the practical sums and said, well, okay, here's a scenario. What does it mean to them? Um, and I don't think anybody actually read the stuff that we produced and talked about it either. But it's you know,
I
it's
remember,
complicated. I
you
mean,
know,
my own feeling is that, social care really and health have just been far too divorced, and you need to recognize that social care needs to have health funding in it. And it's not a huge amount when you compare it to the rest of the NHS budget, but it will make a huge difference to people.
it really would. And I remember we were talking about the deal not, charges and how it was going to work. And I remember for my own, purposes, I sat down and ran the numbers on, average stay in a care home, what care costs are, what hotel costs are, how long it would actually take you to hit your cap. And I went, this is just not going to work. And low, you know, just and but it really captured the imagination of the public because people still talk about it, and say, oh, well, I've got this care cap, and you don't. So interesting that you're saying that. So other benefits. I mean, the interior workings of the DWP and getting benefits is something that I think many people find quite mysterious.
I think the DWP find it mysterious. They if you go back to advantage of being around for a long time and look at things like the 1988 benefit changes, which is huge, far-reaching change, moved from supplementary benefit to income support and so forth, happened overnight and absolutely seamlessly, no problems, and was more complicated from benefits technology, sort of technical perspective than the move to universal credit has been, and they've cocked that up something rotten. And if you go back to look at the white paper around the introduction of it, it was adamant. We have talked to our suppliers and our policy people, and it is a small change, very simply implemented. And fortunately, there will be no need in future for the complex advice and information industry that's grown up because the benefit will be simple for people to understand. So there is a kind of mythology within the DWP about how easy it is for benefits to work. But in the moment, I've been spending a lot of time looking at older people and the way in which their other sorts of financial kind of situations and benefits work together, which again, people don't tend to do very much. So if you look at pensions and benefits, for example, there are some huge kind of opportunities after pensions freedoms came in 2016 to people to choose how they take their pension savings that would affect the way in which their benefits entitlement changes. So very simply, if you're going to kind of irregular drawdown, you can get a lot more, you can retain a lot more entitlement to means tested pension credit than if you go into an annuity or regular drawdown. And again, nobody actually makes those joining up bits. The same with social care and benefits and health and benefits and so forth. But we really don't have anybody who is living outside their silos within DWP or often within kind of the advice world, or I guess in your world in kind of private practice and so forth. Everybody is very specialist and they're very great at their kind of specialities or specialisms. What nobody seems to be looking at is, well, how do you look at the fact, that my speciality says do this, but if I'd looked at from your speciality perspective, you'd say do something else. How do you bridge that kind of gap? And that's something I think which really we are moving away from. We're getting more and more specialist and more expert at what we do, and less aware of how that fits in with other people.
It's a really interesting point, because when I first started sort of practicing law, and I was a trainee solicitor, and you just get thrown into I got thrown into everything, and I was in a multi-office, multi-discipline practice, and I learned a lot. And some of that was I can't help, but CABs across the road, very useful, and doing legal aid, legal help. And we offered that for people, and in and then obviously that was all sort of taken away, not only by the government but also by the realization that if you're trying to sort of run a business and attract talent and people, it's almost impossible to run a legal aid practice, um, given how little is paid compared to sort of commercial rates, which I think, a lot of lawyers, we get a bad rep, but there is that sort of element of access to justice I think people do consider to be very important. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's that sort of disassociation and divorcing of benefits and understanding how they work and how they passport things. I think that's one of the conversations I sort of have with people. Talking about disabled people. So I'll do a lot of work with parents and grandparents who might have disabled children or grandchildren. And one of the key questions to me is, are they ever likely to be on benefits? Because if they are, we need to have a very different conversation.
Mm.
But I think that comes with the territory of working with the more vulnerable
Oh yeah,
client base. But certainly it's not something that is easily understood.
no. I mean, I don't think that regardless of what they've said in the past, that the prime mover of any kind of policy drafter is to simplify the end result. Yeah. It's one of the problems about precision, isn't it? If you want to have a benefit system that's easy to understand, it has to be generous. It has to allow for people who wouldn't meet a very precise test to get it. You need to have the edges blurred and to have not quite discretion, but to have the ability to say, it's a very broad brush kind of approach. Once you start saying, well, no, we have to start looking at how do we cut the costs of benefits, then you start introducing more rules and tighter rules, and alongside that goes the complexity, I suppose. Um, and it's probably a fundamental misunderstanding. I mean, benefits is not a thing that you spend, I think, money on anyway. It's simply a transfer of kind of existing funds. You're moving money that you want to have in the economy, instead of maybe putting it directly into subsidizing an industry, stick it into the pockets of somebody who's on benefits. That they're not going to save that money and spend it abroad. They're going to spend it immediately locally in kind of local shops and local businesses, and that's going to go into those businesses, and that's going to get circulated back in, and it'll end up back around in the hands of government anyway. So it's a kind of transfer process, not a cost process in that sense. And if you look at something like oh think something simple. Minimum wage. Minimum wage is the classic example. There's a national living wage. Um, if government decides to be generous, it puts the national living wage up, which is great. But they don't actually. It's not even their money that gets transferred or spent. It comes from an employer, and the employer pays out more and pays out a bit more because of all extra national insurance and so on. Um, uh, so that's a bit of money that goes back into government in terms of tax and NI. Then what's left with the person on their net earnings is, well, if they're on benefits, the benefits go down a bit. Um, so even there's less practical. And when you model it in the worst kind of example of somebody now, say on universal credit, working full time, getting an increase in their wage, well, it ends up that about 97% of the extra money in a few worst cases just ends up straight back in the government's pocket. So it's a transfer, it's an employer's tax in some ways rather than a government thing. And yet, it's presented very, very nicely as being government generosity. And there's a whole pile of those sorts of examples that you can build where you're talking about um, if you like, short-circuiting the flow of money, sort of, from the spending departments to the taxing departments. And if you put it via people, it has a lot more beneficial effect, in human terms, than if you do it more efficiently directly. But that's just me being a kind of haranguing again, I'm afraid, which is the temptation that I have.
I think it's fair. I think if you as you say have been seen all the changes and seen how it goes, and you can see how the policy develops, can't you? And from a sort of post Second World War welfare state, we don't, the 5 pillars, and we don't want to see the sort of poverty and education pieces. And you can see that sort of grand theory, can't you? And then my goodness, in the last sort of 70 odd years, how life has coming up at 80 years, how life has accelerated because of the welfare state, I think, to an extent, because of the ability to give free education and free health care, free at the point of delivery. What an astonishing difference it's made to people's lives. People,
Mm.
are living longer. People are living well longer. Some people aren't living so well longer, but we're seeing shifts in that, aren't we? And that ability to contribute to society. And also, so I think for me, there's that sort of ability to contribute to society because you've had free healthcare, which means that there's an illness that perhaps would have been fatal is cured, so then that person goes back out into the economy. And the other side is the safety net, isn't it, of the benefits. And there's I think there's a big disconnect between the two, because there's an expectation that the NHS in particular is this sort of sacred cow of wonderful
Oh yeah, yeah. I
delivery.
mean, it is a contradiction, isn't it? I mean, it gets from your side. You must see this quite a lot. So if you have a health system that spends a lot of money, or it costs a lot of money to keep somebody alive, but they're alive in a state where they continue to need care and support, um, then you're spending money to have to spend even more money in a sense, and that puts the weight on the budget. And the government looks at it and says, "This is, we're spending far too much money on disability benefits." And in a kind of Jonathan Swift world, you would probably say, well, the economic answer is, cut the health costs and therefore don't keep them alive in the first place to have the ongoing expense. But fortunately, I think even this government isn't going to go down that kind of route. But what it won't do is recognise the consequences, in a sense, of improving healthcare, which is that on the minority side of things, that's going to come with an accompanying additional cost that's ongoing.
Mm, mm. And I was reading an article yesterday. It's a it's Denbigh County Council are paying, I think it's £37,000 a week for a care package for one disabled child.
Mm.
And there's a call out for, hang on, how much? When your average care you're paying for people the in the community who are elderly is something like 750. And there's a need to look at the article again sort of properly for the figures, but there's been a call for that sort of, hang on, there's a huge disconnect at this point where you've got one person who clearly has exceptional needs. And we're obviously not sort of don't talk about who or what or why, but then that disconnect between, well, hang on, I've worked all my life, if this is what I'm getting. um
Yeah, I mean,
it's just read the article. I mean, it's obviously slightly sensationalist. It's a newspaper.
I think there are two things there, aren't there? One is, society, ought to be able to accept the costs, of supporting members that need that kind of help. And I guess things in a sense, it could be done more would be economically if you went back to an institutionalized form of support rather than kind of care in the community bit. But the other thing is, again, it's that headline, as you say, this idea. It's not actually probably a £37,000 a week cost. If you broke that down, I'm sure you'd find that a very large proportion of that is care and support work. So that's people who are, doing that necessary kind of work and being paid for it. So on the other side of the coin, they are workers, and then they count as being people who are in work and therefore much better than people who would be dependent upon benefits. And the money that they earn is being spent, on food and housing and clothing, goes back into the broader economy. So it's never this absolute cost. It's always that issue around, it's a transfer of money in different routes that ends up kind of being much less than the headline figures would be. And the same thing's true. You're talking about kind of the benefit side of things. I think there are big issues around disabled children and the move that they face at age 16 when they move from disabled child benefit to DLA for children onto PIP now and so forth, and the number of people that don't go onto it and the different kind of rates and so forth, that we somehow create not just barriers, but we create these kind of gaps and changes that affect people's lives. Because once again, we're trying to be over precise, we're trying to be very clear cut, we're trying to set regulatory black and white lines everywhere, rather than allowing for that kind of much broader brush effect that would make the humanity side of things more important than the treasury side of things.
And I think you've also hit on something really important there, that sort of institutionalization piece. And it's ironic that the article I was reading about this, 35,000 pounds a week package, things works out to £2 million a year, is in Denbigh, because Denbigh had, as did many counties, had a notorious asylum, and it's now derelict, and obviously quite rightly so. I think we've sort of moved away from the institutionalization to care in the community, and it's that understanding piece which seems to not really for me has filtered through, that we don't have asylums, and it's just a good thing. We don't have these people locked up for the entirety of their lives, which is a good thing. But then how is that care provided for? Well, it's provided for in the community, and then that does need to be paid for through as you say, through the treasury, through the state. But at the same time, if these people who are working as carers are contributing. So I think it's a hugely important point to not just focus on the recipient. It's much bigger, isn't it?
Oh yes, yeah. And again, from the kind of perspective of people working in the benefits world, we probably don't look at the care side enough. We look at whether we can get somebody a bit of extra sort of DLA or a bit of extra PIP or extra means tested benefits, and we don't really think about what that money really does make a difference in what people can spend it in, and what I suppose impact there is on people's lives if they don't get it. So we're on that kind of transactional kind of edge of it, and the people who see the consequences are on the kind of the health and the social care end of it, I guess.
Mm, mm. So, what changes are you envisaging coming down the line with it? As you say, the move. Of course, we've got universal credit, we've got PIP, we've got DLA, we've got all these wonderful acronyms. Nobody understands them. But what do you see is going to be, or what, if you had a crystal ball, what's your sort of
Wouldn't that be nice?
expectation?
I mean, my nightmare is one day I'll wake up and there will be a decent, easy to understand benefit system, and then out of work, and that's my that's the danger. We all got very excited about the green paper, the kind of the proposed changes to PIP and other things that got rebelled against. And I think we're now in a kind of hiatus, I suppose, a situation where I think government would like to be able to carry on putting things off, because whatever it decides it wants to do is going to cause it problems. So politically, it's much better not to have to decide anything than to have to decide something when the consequences aren't going to be good for you. I worry about the fact that we seem to have got a government that we expected to be much more kind of on the side of the little people, if you like, that seems not to be on the side of the little people, and sees them instead as being, as the last kind of decade has done, an easy target for the Treasury to pounce on. If we had what we would like, or what I would like to see, I suppose, coming along, it would be something which recognised, first of all, from means tested benefits point of view, that recognised the relationship between what it actually costs people to live, a minimum decent standard of life, and the support that the benefit system gave them. It used to be, again, going back before the 1980s, that when you calculated how much the benefit rates were in each year, there was an amount linked to, the cost of food, the cost of housing, the cost of clothing, the various costs. That link got broken, and it became just a percentage increase put in place, and it's moved well away from any link between the actual costs of living. If you look at Roundtree Foundation and Trussell reports recently, the actual kind of cost of living, and the amount of benefit you get towards them diverged so much. So from a means tested point of view, I'd like to go back to something which actually recognized this is what the amount of money you need to live on, as the basis of the calculation, rather than just, well, let's have a 2% increase this year, or let's freeze it again for a couple more years, which is what tends to happen. From the kind of more personal disability support perspective, regardless of how much the rates are, there's no direct link between what that money is for. I mean, in a way, that's a good thing. The money is not there, year marked to be spent on something related to disability. It's a recognition that disability comes with extra costs, but you can spend it how you like. In a sense, it's the fact that who talk to people in the kind of disability benefits world, you'll still find people saying, well, probably about half the people who are entitled to disability benefits don't get them, which is a stunning kind of indictment. I
It's a
mean,
huge number, isn't
even
it?
even means tested benefits for older people. 2/3 of the people entitled to them get them, I suppose. Um, so the potential is there to hugely increase the costs, if you like, by a decent campaign to get people to claim those benefits. But I think I'd much rather sort of focus on the fact that when you're talking about support for people with disabilities, it's not a question about just chucking a bit of money at them. It's a question of saying, well, what actual help do people need? And again, that divorce between the social care system and the benefit system has meant that you don't look at it and say, well, what do we actually need to give this person a decent quality of life? You look at it and say, well, it's an entry on a balance sheet somewhere and it's far too high, so let's just chop it. So I'd rather sort of go back to something which was almost more discretionary and say, let's kind of try and build a system in that actually gives people what they need, whether they're healthy or not, rather than trying to do something very, very precise. I mean, if you go through what was it? I measured a few years ago my kind of regulations and acts and guidance books on benefits on the office bookshelf, and I think I had something like 7.5 meters of blue books and yellow books and brown books and all the regs and all that kind of stuff. So move away from that kind of precise rules-based system into something which is a bit more humanity-based.
And that would be lovely, wouldn't it? And I think because
Yeah.
humanitarian and giving people opportunities and giving them the best possible life that you can, because we are a civilized society and we should be able to um, far more cater for that. And again, I always find it slightly baffling that this sort of constant battle between, oh, I don't want to pay more taxes, and yet we want all these things provided for by the government. And they think, well, yeah, the money's got to come from somewhere. And I find that tension interesting. And I have a self-confessed, I have a personal conflict at this point because I do a lot of work with clients on estate planning and tax planning, as well as care fee planning, as well as then challenging local authorities and the NHS when perhaps, they don't quite do what they're supposed to do. So I very much see both sides of the coin. And I always say, well, while the law allows me to do all this, I will. I will. People are allowed to mitigate their tax. They are allowed to do that. But there comes a point where, it's not feasible or possible. And the NHS and the local authorities should be doing certain things in compliance with the law. And I find it endlessly fascinating having those two conversations with people and going, well, and just that educational piece around, you're not going to get everything for free. You are, so you have to budget for a future where you might need support, or your children or your grandchildren might need far more support than necessary. Because, and as they talking about vulnerable children and grandchildren, I said, they're going into a hard life,
Mm.
so what do we do to help but give them the best possible life, whilst possibly supplementing the welfare state. And this is a really, for me, it's a really fascinating area where we can work with clients, and it's psychology and it's a sociology and it's the humanity of all these conversations and how it plays out. Because once you have that conversation with somebody and they understand the intricacies, you can see a big shift.
Mm.
And and I think it is. I think you said it earlier. It's so divorced, these concepts, very hard to you know grasp them all. There's sort of, as you say, 7.5 meters of regulations, law, and benefits, just on benefits. That's a lot, and that'll be dense, complex, wording that requires significant input. So, yeah, a better education would be nice, wouldn't it, on these points? What are you, what are you entitled to? What are you not entitled to? Um,
Yeah,
so
and benefits is probably one of the areas where there's also most myth and most misunderstanding and quite a lot of kind of deliberate misinformation sort of being spread around on the internet, for example. I mean, it used to be the kind of um, you know, general myths that you came across day in, day out, that uh, all immigrants automatically get a car and a free widescreen television set. Um, gypsies have a special dog food allowance paid to them in cash every week. Well, that one came from a very senior councillor in Cardiff once to me.
that's a new one on me.
Absolutely. Oh, that was an absolute fact. Apparently, it was new to me. I didn't. I must admit, go away and check on it, but I'm fairly sure that he was wrong on that.
Yes.
But you get lots of those kind of myths, and then of course you get the myths around the whole how much is being spent on things. Um, and it's the case always, isn't it? It's an awful lot easier to spread false stories than it is to spread real ones. I mean, nobody's interested in reading facts. They're much more interested in reading kind of the frightening headlines and the outrageous kind of
Well,
stories that are
that's
around.
it, isn't it? But as you say, I suppose that keeps us both in gainful employment.
Well, yeah, yeah.
When we try and hopefully sort of dispel some of those myths and conversate and those conversation pieces, isn't it? So,
But the consequences of those myths are probably sort of fairly bad as well, particularly around the benefits bit. I mean, if it dissuades people from claiming what they're entitled to, or it persuades people that there's no point in claiming because they won't be entitled to something, then it's really doing a kind of a major disservice, I suppose.
absolutely. So, Gareth, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And if people want to find you, how would they track you down?
Oh, ferret.co.uk is the kind of the main kind of website, I suppose. And if people are watching this in Wales and are interested in getting some free frontline training or free awareness about financial support training, then they can go to dangos.wales or dangos.cymru, Dangos. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, excellent. So any of our Welsh listeners, please go and check that out because I think, that's got to be a phenomenal resource. So thank you very much. And yes, lovely to chat. Diolch yn fawr.
Right, so, right.